Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and we're well into day 2 of the Library 2.013 conference. Saturday is hard for everybody. Speakers, attendees, we thank you so much for being here to watch the live sessions. We've got David Weinberger, who was a keynote speaker last year, which makes him a distinguished speaker this year. David, thank you so much for being here. And you have to hit on that talk button for your microphone to work. We could see your lips moving, but we couldn't hear you.
Yes, because I'm an advanced technologist, so I ignored the talk button.
But you have a snappy-looking microphone.
Yeah, very nice.
Thanks to the conference sponsors and supporters. Thanks to San Jose State University for being the founding partner of the conference, to Follett, Blackwood Collaborate Network for support, and all of the great partners this year. It's a chance for you to indicate where you're participating from. Look to the left of the map. If you're looking for the star icon, click on that, and then click on the map. And feel free to put a note in the chat indicating where you are, the time, the temperature. It's always fun to know where people are participating from. And I'm going to turn the time quickly over to David, but feel free to keep making those notes in the chat. And David, questions I will gather for you and put into the moderator tab of the chat window, and I can help you through that at whatever point you want to take questions.
Okay. So thank you so much for having me. This will be a wildly informal talk. It's not something I've done before. The slides will reflect that. The slides are incredibly minimal, and I assume, how do I get you to see the slides?
We are seeing them right now, and you use the left and right arrow buttons at the top to move forward and back.
Okay, great. You're seeing the slides. Are you also seeing me?
We are.
Oh, that's too bad. Okay, I'm probably going to take me off video because it's just, better for everyone that way. But I'll get started. So buttons to the left, to the right, don't see them. I'm going to just click on the navigator thing, the page explorer.
Yes, if you close down the page explorer, it will be more intuitive.
I see, and there are the buttons. I am just a world-class technologist. So thanks, Steve, thanks very much for inviting me and for the hand-holding. So I want to talk about what it looks a little clipped on the top. It says lessons from Reddit. But these are such minimal slides that even clipping won't stop them. So the first question is, why talk about Reddit? And that's for a few reasons. One is that it's culturally significant. I think it was Pew did a survey recently that said 6% of adults use Reddit. There are 70 million users. There are I think they said 5 billion page views a month, which is just insane. That number comes from a talk that Eric Martin, the general manager, gave a couple weeks ago, and then I had a chance to. I know him a bit, and I had a chance to have a nice long talk with him. I am a Reddit admirer, even though I will acknowledge right at the very beginning that there is a lot not to admire about Reddit as well. So let me pause for a moment to make sure that you can see the slides, you can hear me, and things are going okay so far.
That's all great.
Okay, I will continue. Thank you. Okay, so first question, well, after why this is, one of the reasons, actually I should add, why this is just because I find Reddit really, really fascinating. And I find it fascinating because, for a number of reasons, but one of them is that you can see at Reddit what conversation and even knowledge look like in the wild. Now, of course, one of my points early on is going to be that there is no such thing as the wild on the internet. Nevertheless, there's a particular lack of constraints as well as a very particular set of constraints, but there's a lack of constraints on Reddit that allow conversation, culture, and knowledge to emerge in particular ways that I think may tell us something about those topics more broadly. But we'll see, and maybe you'll disagree. So hit the button. There we go. So just in case you don't know what Reddit is, though, I assume that if you showed up for this, you already have some type of interest in it. But just to be clear, Reddit is a very popular site among particularly a particular demographic, but actually quite wide in the number of people, the types of people who attend to it. When you have that many users, it cuts across demographic lines. Nevertheless, there are some demographic generalizations we can sort of make about it. It's a site at which, like many others, you can nominate a link to something out on the web. Those links get voted up, they get voted down, and the ones that get voted up move up the visible list. You can always see the ones that are voted down, but you have so many that people don't. So it's really, you see the ones that are floated up. It has a home page, which consists of a set of default subreddit, where a subreddit is a topic board that anybody can create one. The subreddits they have a fair bit of autonomy. They even, to some degree, in terms of the design of the page, although Reddit is a particularly ugly site. And when Eric Martin was asked about this at the talk that he gave, which is at the Nieman Center at Harvard, which is basically for pretty hardcore and world-class journalists. I mean, that was who was in the audience. They were surprisingly non-hostile. In the past, journalists, in my experience, have been quite hostile and sneering and condescending about Reddit, and for some good reasons, and some bad ones that maybe we can talk about. Well, anyway, so the subreddits can be on any topic that anybody wants. It is an open platform, which is an important thing about Reddit. It is a platform in a couple of senses. It's a platform in that it does not itself publish anything. It's there simply for other people to publish things, like Twitter or Facebook. And so the journalists' questions, which often have to do with Reddit not being responsible, not taking responsibility or accountability for what's put on their site. And there's some awful stuff and some damaging stuff and some very wrong stuff that's put on their site because it's an open platform. Reddit's response, I think, is the right one, which is, we're a platform. We're not, you look at us as if we're a newspaper or publication, but that's not in general what the net is about. And you're right, we're not responsible for what our users say, and that's the way it should be. This is a place for users to say what they want. So it's a platform in that sense. It's also a bit of a platform in that they have very much an open source ethos. It is open source software. You can download it and set up your own version of Reddit somewhere. You could use it internally in your organization if you want. It's open source. And so it becomes a platform in that sense as well. I'd actually like to see more of that so that more applications can be written that more easily use Reddit as a source of data and information and build their own services, although a fair bit of that happens already. So it's a platform in both of those senses, which I think by itself is interesting and something I really, really like. Reddit is also a culture, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So in case you haven't seen it, this is the homepage as exhibited to me, because you certainly can personalize this homepage, the front page of the internet as it calls itself, I think rather disastrously, actually. I think it's a terrible motto for it. Sets all the wrong expectations. But there you see the typical set of what has floated to the top in the set of default Reddits that that Reddit itself has chosen. And as I say, you can always modify what you say. But you click on one of the titles and you'll get taken to the thread itself, because the URLs, the links that get upvoted, frequently have hundreds of comments, occasionally thousands, and more occasionally tens of thousands or above 10,000 comments. And the comments are threaded, and the comments are themselves voted up or down, which is a really interesting bit of social engineering. So you've seen my face enough. I'm going to take that off. We can all breathe a sigh of relief. Okay, so that's I just picked these pretty much at random. This is just a fairly random sort of thread that you're looking at. Next. Some of the subreddits are better than others. This is a subreddit called Ask Historians. It's a pretty popular one. It's also one that has less of the sort of pop culture, trivial. Well, trivial sounds like it's denigrating, and it is. A lot of Reddit is trivial. It's jokes and funny photos and objectionable photos. By the way, if you see a not safe for work, an NSFW tag on a Reddit, I'd recommend that you do not click on it, because it's very likely either highly sexualized or gory and disgusting, or so. But there's a good ethos there of tagging links that are not safe for work. Not always, but usually. So Ask Historians is not, you'll find, I think, nothing on it that's not safe for work. It is a place where anybody can pose a question, and a bunch of people who care about history hang out, answer the question, and not so much answer. This is not a question-answer sort of environment like Stack Overflow or Quora. They talk about it. They have long threaded discussions about it at its best. So one of the lessons from Reddit, and I think all these lessons are fairly obvious, by the way, so sorry to waste your time, but you can see some of the details, and I'm going to suggest that if you're interested, you look more closely at Reddit, if you haven't already, to explore these. The first is that conversations are engineered. They don't happen naturally. There's no such thing as a conversation in the wild, as if there is no culture involved, no artifice involved. In fact, Reddit works when it works. And as I say, so I should tell you that on a typical home page, there are 25 links from different subreddits posted to that front page. And I would say typically about 1 in 25, so that, let's say, is 4% of those are of interest to me, because I'm outside of their demographic that is dominated to a large degree by what I will unfairly characterize as boy interests. You know, 20-year-old geeky boys, and a whole bunch of that stuff I just don't care about. I do a fair bit of clicking if a quick image looks funny or there's a joke, but I'd say maybe 1 out of 25 is something that I would be willing to acknowledge is interesting to me, and the rest is maybe interesting, but it's sort of tabloid or jokey or whatever. So when the conversations are good, as they frequently are, it's because Reddit has has engineered the environment to elicit certain types of conversation. So I don't know if you followed this at all, but Popular Science a couple of weeks ago announced that they are closing off comments. I recommend that you read the post about it. Just have to Google it, but they look at their comments, and the comments tend to be stupid, and worse than stupid. They tend to be unscientific, that is, unsupported, making wild and dumb claims that add no value to the conversation. And Popular Science points to a research paper that came out not so long ago, a couple months ago, that says that when a comment thread is highly polarized, it tends to polarize how one reads the article itself. So these polarized, stupid comment threads that are coming off of Popular Science therefore actually detract from the science in the article. They make people less likely to believe the good science that's in the article. That's what this one research study said. I'm always skeptical about any one research study, especially in areas like this that have to do with conversation and belief, because it's really hard. These things may be very, very context dependent. Nevertheless, it's worrisome. They cut off comments. Scientific American, a few weeks earlier, the editor of the blogging section of Scientific American read the same article a couple months earlier, and for his own personal blog at Scientific American, responded very differently. He said he also accepts the results of the article, but decided that instead of cutting off all conversation, he would instead moderate really heavily. So anything that is off topic, he is not going to allow to stay. He will delete the comment. And he defines off topic in a way that I think most of us wouldn't, but it's still, I think, really interesting, which is that it's off topic if it's anti-science. So if he's posting about climate change research or new developments in the discovery that human species maybe isn't as has a more linear development than we had thought, which was a couple of days ago was news, and you post on it, evolution is a load of crap, God created the world 6,000 years ago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then he will delete your post as off topic, because the topic isn't, is evolution a real thing, or is global climate change a real thing? It's about something more specific. And he does this in order to enable a good conversation to occur. Personally, I think that's a way, way better response than cutting off comments. Cutting off comments cuts off your audience, cuts off the possibility of the development of knowledge, and it's a really bad thing to do, except in the most extreme cases. And the real lesson, I think, is if your comment thread sucks, fix it. It's your fault. It's not your commenter's fault. It's your fault for not having engineered it correctly, where the engineering may be technical, as in the case of Reddit, which I'll come to in a second, or it may be by establishing social norms, that this is not acceptable behavior and it's moderated. Reddit threads are moderated. There's frequently controversy about the moderation. That's entirely appropriate and inevitable, and it's a good thing. But they're also self-moderating through a bit of technical. This is not a technical breakthrough, but Reddit has a thumbs up and a thumbs down. There are lots of different ways that one could do that. One could only have a thumbs up, as in some sites. You could have a thumbs up and a button that says, you could have a button that says, I agree, and a button that says, this is worthwhile. It would be really interesting to read the posts that people don't agree with, but they consider to be worthwhile. There are lots and lots of, we have only begun to explore the ways of engineering conversations. Some work, some don't. If your conversations aren't working on your site, then it is your fault and you should fix it. The way that it turns out it works at Reddit is that the way that it's engineered favors long, deep deeply threaded conversational threads. The conversations aren't always deep. In fact, one of the things that its form of engineering enables are comment threads to spin out into trivialities, to go from a very serious conversation to a sub-comment, a sub-thread that makes a joke, and then sub people are still riffing back and forth on the joke, and then they come back and they're back at the serious comment. Reddit could engineer it so that doesn't happen, so that it gets moderated out or voted down, but it doesn't. For whatever reason, you get these phenomena at Reddit that are particular to the engineering that they've done. And if they don't want those sorts of comments, in fact, they have introduced a norm, a social norm, that if you want the conversation not to spin out into these silly threads, some of which are really amusing and some of which are just sort of dumb from my point of view, then you put in basically a hashtag in brackets in the title saying serious. And what that means is moderators will remove the jokey remarks. And sometimes that's appropriate. It's good to have that social tool in your quiver, so to speak. One of the consequences of the thumbs up, thumbs down at Reddit is that it helps develop a certain type of culture, or one might say a monoculture. We're going to talk about that at some point. Look at, in its most positive way, the thumbs-upping ability results in the most worthwhile comments moving to the top, and the sort of the racist, vile, sexist BS tends to be voted way down the list. And when you have as many comments as a Reddit thread can have, ones that are voted down are unlikely to be seen. You can look for them if you want to, but it means what people read, what is there for you to read at the top, tends to be worthwhile in some sense, a sense determined by the crowd, by the Redditors, by the people participating. The Redditor is a pretty misleading term. It's the term for anybody who's participating in Reddit, not an editor in the traditional sense. We're all editors, aren't we? Pretty much we are. I've seen the same sort of social engineering work really nicely without any thumbs upping or thumbs downing. It's not the only way to achieve this. So for the past more than 10 years, I've been at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard, which is has a fantastic ethos. More or less on purpose, although I've never heard anybody say this, there is an expectation that when somebody, you're at one of the frequent informal talks that are held there, there's a bunch of really smart people. These are open to the community, to the entire community, not just to Harvard, and all sorts of really interesting and smart people show up. But they catch on really quickly that the ethos that has been established in this particular environment is it's a sort of bad form to try to show up the speaker, to show where the speaker was wrong and why you're so much smarter and know so much more than anybody else in the room. That's discouraged simply by the social ethos. Instead, the conversation almost always focuses on the worthwhile things, the interesting and worthwhile things that the speaker has said. And this results in a sort of, in my experience, a really rare academic experience where so much of the time, in so many circumstances, you are trying to prove that you're smarter than the last person who spoke. So this sort of social engineering, doesn't require technology, but it does require some form of thought and consistency. The last thing I want to say about the engineering of conversations is that it's really not clear how replicable the lessons are. So it may be that conversations are truly emergent. And so that the bit of engineering that works in one space works really well, and you try to move it over to your space, exact same thing. You download Reddit, it's open source, you download it, you install it into your environment, and for whatever reason, your environment is different, the topics are different, the people are different, the culture, something is different. And what worked at Reddit totally fails in your environment. And the same is true for any bit of conversational engineering. It's not at all clear that there is a science, or even that there can be a science of conversational engineering, of this sort of social engineering. It may be that conversation is the deepest human connection. We can talk about anything. Conversations can play so many different roles in our culture. Everything that happens in human society is accomplished through conversation of one sort or another. So there are as many types of conversation as there are ways of humans to interact. Conversation may be truly emergent. That is, it may arise from small factors that can have huge and basically unpredictable changes. And so it's not clear that that we are going to be able to learn enough about how this happens to be able to replicate the tools. So, okay. Another thing that I take from Reddit, one of the reasons I really like it and why I like the internet overall, and I really like the internet overall, is that we are constantly surprised by what happens at scale. Maybe it's just a matter of our upbringing so far, but it may well be that our brains simply are not wired to understand things at the scale at which the internet presents them. And sometimes what happens at scale is very, very depressing. We know in history, for example, the rise of mob justice, of mobs, is a terrible thing that happens at scale. You get nice people together, and you put them into this huge mob, and they'll lynch people. So we've always been surprised by scale, but now we are at a scale unimaginable. We are a truly global scale. We can't wrap our heads around the number of Redditors who are involved, even the number of Reddits, the number of subreddits. There are over 100,000 subreddits so far. We don't, there's about 6,000 active ones, but 6,000 is also a lot. The number of comments, you're getting some threads that have 20,000 comments in them. It's hard for us to understand those numbers and to see what it feels like. One of the good things about Reddit's technique of upvoting is that there may be 20,000 comments, but you're always only seeing the ones that make it to the top and reading as far down the list as you want. So there's a type of natural filter there. When you are at this sort of scale, social filtering, which is what Reddit is, or like so many other things on the net, it works, and it works pretty well in the ways that I think I've mentioned. But it doesn't give coverage, and so this is one of the reasons why journalists are often highly skeptical about Reddit, because if you look at it as a replacement for newspaper, then you're going to be very disappointed. There's tremendous scale, but it certainly does not cover all of the events of the day. In fact, it covers on the front page, or the pages you're likely to look at, relatively few. So you get, even though we're at scale here, you don't get coverage. What you instead get is sort of a quirkiness, a magnification of quirkiness. It's the things that are interesting, about which people want to, things that people haven't noticed, things that people want to argue about. Those things are what make it up the list. So it's very much unlike a respectable newspaper. In some ways, it's more like, in that regard, like a tabloid, in that what gets featured are the things that are most interesting. You see this at Huffington Post, too, which is obviously an edited and curated site. It's not a crowd site in terms of what makes it to the front page. Except Huffington Post tries to give the sense that it's providing something like coverage, because its first story, the big headline, is almost always a news story, and then there are a couple of other that are news stories, but the rest of the page is filled up with things that will be arresting to your interest. Side boob is the most famous of the Huffington Post coverage items. So scale doesn't provide coverage. It does magnify quirkiness. But it does, in terms of the growth of knowledge, which I have a particular interest in for no particular reason. It is interesting to me in that scaled expertise allows for a sort of local expertise that otherwise we don't usually encounter. And by local, I mean both geographically and also in terms of the particularity of the topic. But this happens unpredictably and at random. So that, for example, there was a thread a while ago, for me, a pretty boring topic. It was, maybe not for you, but somebody who had been taking trains around the world for a year, 6 months, I can't remember. That's because it wasn't interesting to me. And so that person went on Reddit and said, ask me anything, talk about that in a minute too, and about this topic. Trains are taking trains, and the top-rated question was, what's the worst train station in the United States? And the answer, by the way, it was East St. Louis. Sorry if you're from East St. Louis, I'm just reporting. And so this started a thread of people who lived in St. Louis talking about that train station. And by the way, general agreement, it's a pretty miserable train station, somewhat dangerous. So it's local in that sense. We're hearing from people from East St. Louis, which normally I don't do. I just, I'm in Boston. I just don't hear from a lot of East St. Louisers. But the thread followed its own course, and it went from talking about the muggings and the knifings that were there to some EMTs who started talking about knife wounds. And so you get into this thread about taking trains. Suddenly there's a local expertise, not geographically, but about knife wounds that shows up, and there was a really interesting discussion about knife wounds. It's not something I would have thought I was interested in, but it was pretty compelling, and apparently a lot of people at Reddit thought it was compelling, because that's why the thread got voted up. That's why the question about what's the worst train station made it to the first spot in that thread. That sort of emergence of local, or I'll give you another example. So in the Ask an Historian subreddit that I showed at the beginning, if there's a discussion about Roman army tactics, and somebody is talking about the use of shields to form a wall or whatever, and that the shields are useful for deflecting arrows, you may well get a metallurgist popping up explaining what sorts of arrowheads get deflected and what the effects are, and an argument among metallurgists, people who, because this discussion is at scale, there happens to be experts in a weird and unpredictable set of things, and they may pop up their head. And that sort of emergence of local expertise, I think, is completely fascinating. It's not something that happened easily before. The metallurgists would have been off in the International Journal of Metallurgy. We would never have heard from them. But now they're popping up into an environment that's interesting to us because it's about Roman soldiers, and we're learning from them. Their knowledge is getting absorbed and applied and retransmitted. It's an amazing ecosystem. This is not just Reddit. This happens because of Reddit's social engineering. This happens with great frequency, actually, there, but it happens all over the web. This is characteristic of the web in general. Next topic is, in fact, about interests, because as you can see, these threads, at their best, well, take that back. These threads are always driven by the interests of the people who are participating. That's what makes them emergent. And they're emergent because it turns out, we learned from Reddit, and I think we learned from the web in general, from the internet, that we don't have interests. Interests have us. Interests are not things that, some set of topics. So if I were to ask you what you're interested in, if you were to ask me, let me switch it. If you were to ask me, what am I interested in? I would name 3 or 4 things. I could do that, I think. You know, I'm sort of interested in internet policy issues. I'd try to come up with something, you know, a little elevated instead of some of the other stuff I'm interested in. But I'd probably peter out at maybe 4 or 5 or 6 topics, you know, and other stuff. But it turns out, if you go to Reddit, or if you spend a lot of time just being distracted on the internet in general, as many of us do, that Reddits are not things that we bring into the world, some set of topics that we are interested in. Rather, interests are ways that the world grabs us in unexpected ways. We don't know what we're going to be interested in. I can tell you, I had no idea I was interested in the train station in East St. Louis until I started reading this thread for whatever reason that, oh, it turns out there's stuff there that I am interested in. Interests are things that happen to us. They are ways the world connects itself to us. It's ways the world hooks us. And so this makes the idea of knowledge being broken up into topics much less obvious. So the old idea was that there are a set of disciplines, there are a set of topics. The disciplines get instantiated in university departments, for example, into shelves in a bookstore or in a library, and also get distilled down into the size of a book. A topic is, you know, book-sized, and that's not a coincidence. That's because our old medium had to confine topics within covers. When you read a book, it has to tell you everything you need to know about the topic that's been declared, or else you feel like the book was a failure. The author can't say, I'm going to skip over this vital piece of it, go read about it elsewhere. The author has to try to pull everything in. So topics, as sort of identifiable things with boundaries, that's a result of books, of the limitation of paper. It's not the natural way the world is. And if you go to a site like Reddit, you can see very clearly what you can see all over the internet, which is that topics are not like that at all. Our interests don't work on topics. They spread out from link to link, from connection to connection, as we get pulled through the thread and get pulled through the internet and get pulled through the world. Another thing that we see in this regard as well at Reddit, I think Reddit in particular, we certainly see this all over as well, but it's particularly marked at Reddit, where there is something like a topic, because there's a subject heading for the link. So the topic is Roman military tactics or whatever. So you know what the topic officially is, but the topic is really just a starting point. And then there's this emergent thing that happens as it spreads out all over. There is almost always no sense of closure. Well, now we have exhausted this topic and it's done and in a box and it's finished. It just sort of peters out over time because the next topic has come by. And for me, one of the most interesting things about this, as we watch in a particularly in a knowledge-based Reddit thread, I mean, a bunch of them are just joyful jabber or whatever, but one that's actually dealing with some type of, you know, identifiable topic, the outbreak of humor in the threads, and in particular, somebody's talking about something very serious, and somebody puts in a reply that's funny, and that sparks a thread with a particular type of banter, which for me is also really interesting at Reddit, the extent to which it has generated its own forms of rhetoric, its own ways of speaking, its own phrases that it uses, but for me, even more the rhetoric of what a proper response is. For example, I'll give you an example of a particular. This is a particularly small example. There's a acronym. It's not really an acronym. It's an abbreviation. FTFY. Fix that for you. And the way this works is if somebody says something, you can do usually a funny correction of it. You change a word, and it becomes now an arch comment or whatever, and you suffix this with fix that for you. That's it's like a knock-knock joke in the sense that it's a form of humor that has emerged. In this case, has emerged at Reddit, and there are a whole bunch of forms of humor that have emerged there. That's pretty interesting to me. So the fact that humor is an accepted part of the rhetoric of Reddit, even when the topic is quite serious, I think tells us something important about the restriction on tells us something important about the rhetoric of knowledge. Traditionally, knowledge has been really serious. Books that are knowledge-based, academic books on a serious topic, they don't make jokes. Reddit is full of jokes, and it turns out that when you release knowledge from paper, it gets really funny because it's something that humans do together, and one of the ways, a really important way that we relate with one another and build social bonds is by joking with one another. I find this both fascinating and a great relief. I'm tired of knowledge being so serious all the time. Then there's this topic that has concerned me and many people for a long time, which is echo chambers. So an echo chamber, as you undoubtedly know, is a set of people who are engaged in a form of discourse on a topic in which everybody agrees with everybody else, and they are more or less in a competition to see who can agree the most, and they frequently will drive themselves to more and more extreme positions as they try to top one another. And the consequence of this, it is feared, is that people get more settled in their beliefs, less open to other beliefs, and become more extreme in their beliefs. So here's just 3 people to read about this. Cass Sunstein in Republic.com sets out the case, this is the canonical case, for raising the alarm about the internet as a set of echo chambers. And it's an alarm because if it is the case that we prefer to hang out with people with whom we agree, and if by so doing we form echo chambers, and if it is the case, as it surely is, that the internet allows us to find people with whom we agree more easily than ever before in human history, then the internet is driving us towards echo chambers and away from openness, rather than making the world into a more open environment. And so the internet is a disaster. That's more or less Sunstein's argument. I'm not exaggerating. I'm putting it crudely in the interest of time. Eli Pariser, in The Filter Bubble, wonderful TED Talk, and a really, really good book as well, talks about the same sort of danger, but he's looking at the way in which sites, and Facebook and Google, etc., are personalizing results, so we only see things that we agree with. It is certainly possible to view Reddit that way as well. You're hanging out with people with whom you generally agree. Those are the threads that you're clicking on. And then Ethan Zuckerman has a book that just came out called Rewire that talks about these issues in a very important and sensible way. Ethan is somewhat optimistic, despite his book being a very data-based argument that the internet so far has not opened us up to other cultures, but rather has enabled us, well, I'm not sure that it's shut us down further, but it has not opened us up the way that we had hoped. So 3 really good books. So Reddit is an echo chamber, I think, in classic terms. So I should have said at the beginning that from my point of view, Reddit has gone downhill over the past 6 months as it's become more popular. It's not clear it's going to maintain a culture. 6 months ago, up until 6 months ago or so, it was much easier to see that there was some consistent set of attitudes and beliefs that define an echo chamber or a culture. So in general, lots of different sorts of people on Reddit, of course, but what you would see of it, the front page tended to be quite libertarian in its views. They don't always put it that way, but you know, that tends to be the case, hence the Ron Paul image. It assumes atheism is the only thing that rational people can believe, it's the only rational posture, and so there's a great deal of religion bashing, which makes me quite uncomfortable personally. I attribute it to youth, because I'm a condescending bastard. Reddit loves science, evidence-based scientific stuff. They love Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's a hero of mine as well, for what that's worth. Reddit also has a surprising enthusiasm for cute animals, which sort of works against some of the other pieces of the Reddit ethos, which seems so hard-headed and at times boyishly sexist. And anyway, so they love the cute animals. They especially love the cute animals when there's an element of altruism involved. It had I'll call it the traditional Reddit culture has been very enthusiastic about altruism, which is really lovely to see. It has prided itself on trying to help people. Then there are a set of memes, you know, these photos that have funny captions. And if you don't know so the same photo is used over and over and over again for the same set of captions, and if you don't know that this is good guy Greg, then it may be a little bit harder to see what this is about, but in this case I think it's pretty obvious. Good guy Greg, this meme is of somebody who does something good casually. Just does the right thing. And so it's a variety generally of small things. It can't get much smaller than this. This is Scumbag Steve. And again, it helps to know this, although again you can tell from the caption itself. Notice the dumb hat. So if you know that this is Scumbag Steve, then you know as soon as you see this hat that it's Scumbag somebody. In this case, it's Scumbag Obama. Reddit used to love Obama. Now they have mixed feelings because of the conflict with libertarian ideals. And this one is really impenetrable unless you know what the meme is. In this case, the meme is, so this woman always represents first world problems, at which point this actually gets sort of funny. These are shibboleths in the old sense of the word. That is a challenge to somebody who's approaching your guard, you're on watch. Shibboleth is a fact that the person who's approaching you would only know if he or she were in fact a friend and not a foe. The fact that these memes are not self-explanatory, that you have to know that this is first world problems, is a way of excluding people who don't know, the outsiders, and a way of exulting in the social ties where we know who this is. And there's an enormous amount of that goes on at Reddit. References, obscure references that you would only understand if you've been reading Reddit for a while. Occasionally now somebody will explain it way down the thread. They'll put in the original link. But this sort of use of shibboleths is a powerful way of forming community or culture, even though it simultaneously does so by excluding those who are outside of it. This is hardly new to Reddit, this way of forming culture by excluding outsiders. There's also, Reddit has its own language that has emerged to some degree, a set of abbreviations. Today I learned, fix that for you. And then 3 variations I want to talk about just a little bit. IMA. So an IMA is it prefaces a topic, a subject heading for a thread, and it says that I am a something. I may be a celebrity or somebody with whom Reddit disagrees or somebody in an interesting job or whatever. And then the next piece of it will be AMA, ask me anything. So you're putting yourself forward to answer questions. AMAA is ask me almost anything. I love the AMAs, although they have gotten way, way less interesting to me over the past few months as I assume because Reddit has become more of a mass phenomenon. In traditional Reddit culture and IMA, the best ones were, at least for me, were ones in which Reddit engaged in a conversation with people from outside of their culture, people with whom they fundamentally disagree. So Reddit is an atheist culture, it's scientific culture, and they do an AMA where somebody would step forward and say, I am a fundamentalist evangelical Christian who does not believe in evolution, ask me anything. And the best AMAs, people will engage with one another on their topics respectfully, asking the sort of questions that they actually have for one another to try to understand each other. The pretense of, they're not impolite, but the holding back and political correctness and all of that goes out the window. Questions are asked respectfully, but they are the actual questions that people have always wanted to know. And so in the best of the AMAs, more and more of them now are just celebrity AMAs, but in the best of them, where they're encountering a contrary point of view, you would have the sort of conversation that our liberal, not in the political sense, but the old political philosophical sense, our liberal tradition has always valued the highest, where two people who fundamentally disagree will sit down with one another and they will engage and go back and forth and go down to the fundamentals of their beliefs and be open to changing from one, changing their mind. So the Nazi and the Jew will sit down finally over a cup of coffee and have a rational conversation. Tell me, my dear Nazi friend, why you believe what you do, and I, as a Jew, will tell you why and if as we discuss, it turns out your views are correct, then of course I, the Jew, will become a Nazi. And the Nazi says, oh, my Jewish friend, same thing. I am open to becoming a Jew if it's to turn out in our conversation. These are the highest valued conversations in our tradition, and they never happen. They have never happened. We can't have conversations like that, but we get something very close to that at the best of the AMAs, at the best of them. Something very, very close to that. There's one huge difference, though, between the classical ideal conversation and what the best of the AMAs. The difference is that in the classical one, we're trying to convert each other. The Jew is open to becoming a Nazi. The Nazi is open to becoming a Jew. We're, whatever your favorite polar opposites are. At an AMA, the premise is you're a fundamentalist Christian who doesn't believe in evolution. We understand that, and we're not going to try to convince you. We understand you are not going to be convinced by us, and you coming into it, if this is going to work, you have to understand we're not going to end up in the conversation, end up at the end of this thread converting. It's just not going to happen. That's not on the table. It's not what the conversation is about. This is instead an anthropological exploration of another culture. And this sort of conversation, which I find incredibly useful, and among the best that I have ever seen in our culture, this conversation only happens because Reddit is an echo chamber. That is, it is a culture, a set of people who have a set of beliefs that allows them to ask questions, to have a set of questions that's interesting to them, and to get those questions asked and answered and to engage in an open dialogue. If each side was trying to convert each other or turn into another stupid, stinking debate and would end up, it would not be interesting. It's very different from the Wikipedia NPOV, a neutral point of view. It's the opposite of it. And I love Wikipedia, and I think NPOV is another model, another miracle of the modern world that we're able to achieve it. I'm sorry, I'm responding to one of the questions on the chat. NPOV tries to get people on the same page, and it works to an amazing degree, but it works in part because there's a very intricately worked out, intricately engineered set of rules for how conversation will proceed and how decisions will be made. And if you look at the talk pages for a Wikipedia page, especially one that's controversial, and if you haven't, I'm sure you have. I mean, talk pages are just amazing at Wikipedia. You will see people engaged in a set of quite rule-bound discourse. And those rules I really like, and they get people to NPOV, to a neutral page that both sides can agree upon. But, so that's one really useful thing to do, but first of all, it depends upon a hidden homophily, a hidden agreement that the people who participate in those conversations are ones who are able to and willing to and like to participate in that form of discourse. The creationists go off, and they usually, there are people who are not going to be happy with the NPOV, with the page results, and so they'll go off. The internet's very big. They'll do their own Wikipedia. They'll do their own post or whatever. So Wikipedia works in part by self-selecting the sorts of people who want to come to a come to a table and negotiate a shared page. The IMAs at Reddit are exactly the opposite. They are not trying to get to, they assume there will be no single neutral point of view, there will be no conversion and no agreement. So good, let's talk. And that is also a remarkable thing. So Reddit's able to do this because it is an echo chamber. It is a set of, it consists of people who share a set of beliefs. So lessons from Reddit? I don't know. I put this up in some type of crazy hope that I'd be able to summarize, but I'm not going to. So instead, all I'll say is that just as the tools that, we may not be able to generalize the tools that lead to successful conversations. They may be too dependent, it may be too emergent of a phenomenon. That is, conversation itself is too emergent to allow for easy rules. It may be that there, in fact, aren't a lot of lessons to learn from Reddit, because insofar as it succeeds, and again, acknowledge that much of what it does is, from my point of view, cannot be considered a success. But when it succeeds, it may be that it's too particular to the time, the place, the people, the technical engineering decisions, and the like. So there may be not lessons from Reddit, but I'll stop there. So we're able to talk with one another now?
Absolutely. I'm going to turn on microphone capability for everybody. Feel free to raise your hand or just grab the microphone. You do that by clicking on the talk button, which is underneath the image of me and David, who seems to be turning his video back on. David, that's some of the deepest thinking I've done in days, and I really appreciate it. Have you ever read Franz Johansson's The Click Moment?
No, I haven't. Sounds like I should.
I think it's a very interesting description of how serendipity plays into certain things working and other things not, and I think it might be very interesting to look at it in the context of how sometimes these conversations work in one place and then the transfer doesn't work. Okay, I had a question for you. It feels like these technologies are significantly deinstitutionalizing, and we have a history in this country of actually fearing democracy, that when we have an excess of democracy, we lose our cultural control. Sort of as we have an increased digital democracy, are we figuring out how to negotiate that from a thought perspective? The tyranny of the majority was the great concern of the founders. As we increasingly have democracy online, how are we thinking about democracy 2.0?
So there's a simple little question. Thank you, Steve. The question of this versus institutions, whether this is Reddit and the internet, is huge, and I don't think it can be thought through. I think it can only be lived through. We won't know. We won't know for a long time. I think there are signs of both hope and despair. So if you look at what's happening with peer review, sorry, I hang out with academics, so that's the sort of example that comes to mind. But on the one hand, academic institutions are built to a large degree upon the assumption of peer review. That is, that there's a sort of economy of publication, so that if you want to get tenure, you got to be in peer-reviewed journals. Peer review does not scale, however. It keeps the vast majority of articles it has kept out of circulation, promoted the best, presumably. Well-known problems of it, including it can suppress worthy, challenging views that the peer reviewers are uncomfortable with. frequently for good reason, but not always for good reason. We're human beings. So, and what we're seeing now, of course, is this, not only we're seeing this explosion of ideas, information, and knowledge on the net like nobody could ever have imagined. We're seeing the rise of open access publishing and the increasing acceptance of this, and of some hybrid forms for now, being accepted by institutions as credentials for tenure. We're seeing institutions supporting open access in quite wonderful ways. But peer review is going to be, peer review as the measure of academic worth, from my point of view, is, I don't know how to put it, it's a problem. If we stuck with peer review, we would be losing so much of what we want. The alternatives to it have not yet fully emerged. I'm quite hopeful that open access is absolutely going to win. It seems an inevitability to me of that, and that's fantastic. So that's hopeful. On the other side, you look at you look at anything having to do with the infrastructure, the technical infrastructure of the internet, or of copyright overall. It's not at all clear that copyright is that we're going to get the changes in copyright that we need in order to keep culture from being stifled and owned by people who only want to make money from it. It's not clear that and in the US, you'd have to say that our physical infrastructure for delivering the internet is terrible, and it's not clear it's going to get worse because it's owned by a handful of rapacious companies. There are very powerful institutional forces that are at play here, and we won't know what it's going to be like until it's like that. It's not something we can think through. For one thing, just really quickly, in the case of internet delivery, we don't know if somebody's going to invent something tomorrow that's going to let us route around, so to speak, the Comcast and the Verizons and so forth in the U.S. that are in many ways stifling the growth of the internet that they're supposed to be promoting. We just don't know. Nobody predicted Wikipedia. You couldn't predict Wikipedia and what it would do to encyclopedia. So we have to invent our way through it and live through it. I don't think we can we can't predict what's going to happen.
So, David, we actually need to close, so people have a few minutes
to
the next session. Thank you so much. I really appreciated that. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Small audience, but it is recorded, and the recording will be up in about 10 minutes.
Thanks so much. Sorry for talking so much.
No, I'm really glad that you did. Thank you.
No, thanks. Okay. So on.